Who was Solon? What things did he accomplish during his lifetime? And why should we remember him? Born in Athens, Greece in the year 640 BCE, Solon, plain and simple, was one of the most influential men in history. He was a merchant, a philosopher, a poet, and a legislator. He is also considered one of the 7 wise men of ancient Greece, and is one of the few people in antiquity to have actually deserved his own biography. As a matter of fact, most of what we know about his life is because it was written down by the great historian Plutarch in his masterwork, The Life of Solon. I'm Jenner Elias, and this is Historicity, a channel in which we record or keep a record of the constant call time, the good and the bad, in hopes of learning not to repeat the mistakes of the past. He was the son of a man named Existides, a man of moderate wealth. And according to Plutarch, Solon devoted himself to becoming a merchant and commerce after his father donated most of the family's fortune to charity. Solon also developed into a well-learned and well-traveled individual. And Plutarch states that he didn't indulge in trade because of the money, but because he wanted to get experience and learn. For he was a lover of wisdom and not someone blinded by wealth. One of his famous sayings was that wealth I desire to have, but wrongfully to get it, I do not wish. Justice, even if slow, is sure. As a statesman and a merchant, he enjoyed the luxuries that his position assured him. However, his writings present a picture of a man who believed himself to be a member of the poor. He writes in one of his poems, "For often evil men are rich and good men poor, but we will not exchange with them our virtue for their wealth, since one stays always while riches change their owners every day." In his writings, it is clear that at first he started experimenting with poetry to amuse himself. But as time went on and he became older, he started intermixing his political ideas and beliefs with his poetry as a way to teach and admonish Athenians. It is said that his poetry was so powerful that once, in the midst of a war against the Megarians for the island of Salamis in the year 600 BCE, which the Athenians lost, Athens passed a law forbidding anyone from writing or making any type of public comment about Salamis. They were trying to do this to prevent anyone from reigniting the war. But Solon and the youth of Athens were so afflicted by the turn of events that he, unable to endure the disgrace of the loss by his city, decided to challenge and break the law. To do so, he pretended to be crazy for several days, saying random things in inappropriate places and urging his friends and family to tell others that he had actually lost his mind. Then he wrote a poem, and waiting for the moment in which most people would gather at the Agora, Athens marketplace, he got on the herald stone and recited his poem. His friends began to praise him. The crowd loved it, and a young Pisistratus in particular urged and incited the citizens of Athens to obey Solon's words. Soon the Athenians repealed the law and renewed the war for Salamis against the Megarians. And who did they place in command of the war? None other than Solon himself. Legend has it that in order for him to win the war and conquer Salamis for the Athenians, Solon had one of his soldiers pretend to betray Athens and join the Megarians. The Megarians, eager to gain intelligence from this deserter, questioned him, and he revealed to them that the women of Athens were alone in an island making sacrifices to the gods, and if they followed him, they could capture them and could negotiate Athens' surrender in exchange for them. The Megarians, trusting the deserter, sent their most able men to capture the women of Athens. But as soon as their ship was seen over the horizon, Solon ordered the women to leave the island and dressed his youngest soldiers, those who did not even have beards yet, in the women's clothing, and had them dance on the beach to lure in the Megarians. Once the Megarians saw the women at a distance, they leapt out of their vessel, and to their surprise, all they found was Solon and his men, who, after killing them, took over their ship and set sail over to Salamis and infiltrated the city incognito. With this type of military and political cunning, 6 years later, by the year 594 BCE, Solon would be named Archon of Athens, the most powerful position within the city-state and one that would literally give the year his name, in the year of Solon. This took place at a low point in Athenian history. This was a time in which the disparity between the rich and the poor reached a dangerous level. It was a time in which all the common people, all the poor of Athens, were in debt to the rich. And not only that, but in order for the poor to guarantee the loans from the rich, many of them had placed their own bodies as collateral to those loans. So now they were literally slaves of the aristocracy, who would use them to perform works at home in Athens, and in many cases would even sell them to foreign nations in order for the rich to regain their investments back. During this time period, many too were forced to sell their own children or actually run away into exile in hopes of never going back to Athens. Others, because of the cruelty of the moneylenders, began to band together in the hopes of choosing a trustworthy man as their leader to set them free, restructure the land, and reform the government. This is when the wisest of Athenians set their eyes upon Solon as the perfect man to guide the city-state through those tough times. They noticed that as a merchant, he was one of the least implicated men in the problems of the day. And as someone that was middle class, even before a middle class actually existed, they noticed that he was neither associated with the rich and their injustices, nor was he involved with the necessities of the poor. The rich accepted him right away as someone who was well off, and the poor immediately liked him because they recognized him as someone who was honest. He enjoyed the overwhelming support of the city, to the point that some of them actually wanted him to establish a tyranny and declare himself a tyrant. The first resolution he passed once in power would be, he would actually call a disburdenment, in the hopes of not angering those affected. What it meant was that the debts owed by the poor to the rich were all immediately canceled and void. Furthermore, he banned loans securitized with the bodies of the borrowers, ending in that way the continuation of the enslavement system that had plagued Athens up until that point, officially ending debt-based slavery. At first, these measures garnered him the hate and the anger of the rich class, Athens aristocracy. Things even became worse when several of his friends were discovered to have profited from the policies he had actually implemented. You see, one of the things that the poor wanted Solon to do was restructure and redistribute the land appropriated by the rich. But he confessed to some of his closest friends that he was not going to take any action in regard to the land issue. So instead, he was going to focus on the root of the problem and focus on debts. Behind his back and violating his trust, some of his friends, 3 in particular, according to Plutarch, went ahead, secured loans from the rich, and bought as much land as they could. And when Solon's reforms were implemented, then they just refused to pay back those loans based on the new laws that their friend Solon had just passed. The only thing that remediated this scandal during Solon's administration was that when it was revealed that out of all the citizens of Athens who had lent money and were basically losing fortunes up until that point, Solon himself would be one of the most affected. In the end, he ended up angering both parties either way. The rich were not satisfied because he forgave the debts of the poor, and the poor were not satisfied because he did not give them back their lands. Soon after, however, both parties wisened up to the advantages of the reforms implemented by Solon and how everyone was actually favored. They even trusted him to reform their constitution, including the justice system. In doing so, he repealed the laws of Draco, the infamous draconian laws, most of which, if violated, were punished by death, except in the case of homicide. He left those laws, those related to homicide, just the same way that they had been established by Draco. Finally, he divided the citizenry of Athens into 4 classes based on wealth rather than heredity or family history, while at the same time allowing every citizen, rich or poor, the right to vote and the right to accuse anyone of wrongdoing. And although the poor could not hold public office in Solon's Athens, they were allowed to serve as jurors. At first, this might not seem very important, but what you have to keep in mind is the fact that cases being litigated in court were decided by the jurors. So poor people in the end had a hand in deciding what was right and what was wrong within their city-state. In his histories, Herodotus wrote something that has been proven to be more a legend than a chronological fact. He wrote that at the height of his fame and power, Solon was invited to be interviewed in Sardis by Croesus, the king of Lydia. Solon had retired from political life and was traveling the known world at the time, the Greek world, for 10 years. It is said that when Solon entered Croesus' court and saw the opulence and richness of the kingdom, he behaved much like a small-town fisherman who sees the sea for the first time. Because just the same way that such a fisherman thinks that each river he encounters on the way to the sea is the actual sea until he is finally met with the vastness of the real thing, so did Solon think that every courtier in Croesus' court was the king himself, until he finally arrived at Croesus, dressed in all his opulence and richness. You see, Croesus was really trying to impress Solon with his wealth. But as we already know, Solon was not a man easily impressed by wealth. As a matter of fact, he made it obvious that he was not pleased or impressed. So Croesus made his servants open his chambers and showed Solon the vastness of his coffers and asked him if he had ever met or known a happier man than he was. To which Solon replied that indeed he had. That Telos, a middle-class citizen of Athens who lived an honest life, left behind reputable children, and died having lived a life without ever experiencing need or desiring much, a balanced life in regard to wealth. Not giving up, Croesus asked again, other than Telos, have you ever met anyone else more fortunate? To which again Solon replied that yes, Cleobis and Bito, 2 brothers who, when their mother's oxen who were too tired to take her to sacrifice to the gods, they took the yoke upon themselves and placed it on their own backs and got her to the festivities under the applause and admiration of their people for showing so much love and devotion to the woman who gave them life. And after partaking in the celebrations of the night, went to sleep, never to wake up again, and died admired, loved, and celebrated by their people. At that point, Croesus was angry. He considered Solon to be a very strange man indeed. And more than that, he considered him to be stupid. He asked him, enraged, "What is it that you don't count us among happy men? Don't you consider us with all this wealth and all the freedom that we have to do whatever we want?" Because, come on, let's be honest, he was a king. Don't you consider us, don't you consider me particularly, to be happy? To which Solon replied, "O king of Lydia, the gods have given us Greeks all the blessings in moderation. And this moderation has given us a kind of wisdom which is measured, a wisdom for the common people and not for kings and their splendid wealth. This wisdom, such as it is, observing that human life is always subject to change, prevents us from being vain about the things we have right now, and reminds us to take into account that as long as you are living, things could always change. As long as you're living, nothing, not money, not wealth, not happiness, is ever guaranteed. And everyone's future is always uncertain. However, when the gods give a man prosperity until the end of his life, that man we consider happy. Because to call someone happy while he's still alive is like giving an athlete a medal while he's still in the middle of the race. The verdict would be insecure and without authority. Having said this, according to Herodotus, Solon left Croesus to continue enjoying his life and his kingdom. It wasn't until Lydia was invaded by Cyrus the Great and his Persian army, and Croesus arrested, humiliated, and about to be burned at the stake, that Solon's words finally returned to his mind and their meaning was finally revealed to him. As he lay there, attached to the pyres, about to be lit, he proclaimed 3 times as loud as he could, "Oh Solon, oh Solon, oh Solon," recognizing the meaning of those wise words because it had finally been revealed to him, and that the man that he once thought as uncouth and unwise was indeed one of the 7 wise men of antiquity. This sudden exclamation by a man who was about to die prompted Cyrus the Great to pause the proceedings and ask, what god or man is this Solon he's talking about? When Croesus explained to Cyrus what Solon had revealed to him, Cyrus immediately understood, for he was a wiser man than Croesus. And being impressed with the words of the Athenian, he released Croesus, forgave his life, and placed him in a position of honor for all men to see and learn from his example, that nothing is ever guaranteed as long as you're still living. When he returned to Athens, Solon was too frail and old for public life. And at this time, Plutarch states that the divisions and the fractures that had always existed in Athenian society were again coming back to life. Athens had been divided into 3 different groups, which were at each other's throats. The men of the plain, led by Lycurgus, representing the nobles, the shoremen, or the men of the coast, led by Megacles, who represented the most wealthy Athenians, and the men of the hillmen, led by Pisistratus, the man of the people. Although the city still practiced and revered the laws created by Solon, these groups wanted a new form of government, one in which one of their parties would be the clear winner and the others the losers. As the wisest elder, and since he was still revered and honored by all, Solon held private meetings with the chiefs of these 3 factions, trying to preserve the peace and bring them back together. But these proved to be to no avail. In his meetings, however, Solon witnessed the agreeable qualities of Pisistratus, who wanted to help the poor and was reasonable and moderate in his demands. The entire city actually fell in love with him. They considered him to be cautious and order-loving, a man who valued equality above all, and who would even feel offended if someone proposed changing the existing way of governing Athens. But Solon quickly recognized his real character, and he was the first one to suspect his secret designs. At around the same time, the year 560 BCE, a man by the name of Thespis became the first person to appear on stage playing a character in his own fictional work, which came to be called tragedy or drama, and his job, acting. And Solon, being a good Athenian, someone who loved a good time, attended one of his presentations. It is said that after witnessing his first play, Solon harassed Thespis, heckled him actually, and asked him if he was not ashamed to tell so many lies in the presence of so many people. To which Thespis replied that there was no harm in talking and acting that way in play. But Solon was not satisfied with his answer. Soon, he said, if we give this play or play of this kind so much praise and honor, we will find it in our most sacred contracts. Not much later, Pisistratus, remember him? Slashed himself with his own sword and smeared his own blood all over himself and his donkeys, and marched into Athens' agora, the marketplace, and claimed that his enemies had plotted against his life on account of his political opinion. The people were enraged. They started to follow him. They even provided him everything he wanted, including 50 bodyguards. But Solon approached him in the middle of his spectacle and warned him, "O son of Hippocrates, you are playing a bad version of Homer's Odysseus," he said. "For when he disfigured himself, it was to fool his enemies, but you are doing it to mislead your own countrymen." Then he turned to the crowd and shouted, "Fools, you are following in the footsteps of the fox. Can you not read the hidden meaning behind these charming words?" But noticing that the poor were hell-bent on following Pisistratus, and that the rich, afraid of conflict, shied away, he left the assembly proclaiming that he was wiser than one party and braver than the other, that he was wiser than those who did not understand what was being done, and braver than those who, understanding what was going on, were still too afraid to oppose tyranny. So the people of Athens passed a decree and allowed Pisistratus to become a tyrant. Now, just as Solon recognized, if you look at the list of archons in ancient Athens, you won't find the name of Pisistratus. He was the man behind the scene who ruled Athens until his death in the year 527 BCE, and who would actually pass these tyrannical powers to his sons, Hipparchus and Hippias, both of whom would rule Athens until the year 510 BCE. But Solon did not go quietly into the night. He openly criticized the citizens of Athens, both publicly in the assembly and in his poems, calling them cowards for not standing up to tyranny. And after seeing their inaction and the pointlessness of his work, he retired home, took out his armor, his weapons, and placed them in the street in front of his house, in front of his door. Other accounts actually have him dressing up every day in full armor and arguing and urging anyone who passed in front of his home to fight and rise up against tyranny. From home, he kept on writing his poems, criticizing the cowardice of the Athenians. And when his friends warned him that Pisistratus would put him to death, he assured them that he wouldn't dare because of his old age. As it turns out, reality became stranger than fiction, since Pisistratus had always been a fan of Solon. His reforms preserved most of Solon's laws. Once he solidified power as tyrant, he honored Solon and his accomplishments, showed him kindness, invited him to his palace, and even made him his advisor. Theirs was a relationship of mutual admiration and respect. For when they were at variance about state, their enmity did not bring with it any harsh or savage feelings, but their former amenities linger in their spirit and preserve there the grateful memory of their love. 2 years later, in the year 558 BCE, Solon would pass away. And as legend has it, he was cremated and his ashes scattered around the island he had conquered for the glory of Athens 52 years earlier as he jump-started his political career, the island of Salamis. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button. And come on, subscribe if you haven't already. I'm General Elias, and this is history.